and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Today we are going to start Newswire with a conversation that has been making the rounds since October last year, and it's got to do with India, it's got to do with Russia and the US. So last month, during a US House Armed Services Committee hearing, the Assistant Defense Secretary, Mr. Randall Scriver, called India's decision to purchase the Russian S-400 air defense system as an unfortunate one. Now, he also added to this that they will strive to change India's mind by providing alternative options. Despite the 2017 US legislation, which is countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act, CATSA, which aims to punish countries that do business with Russian defense or intelligence sectors, India went ahead and finalized a deal with Russia in October last year over the Russian-produced S-400s. So it really brings into a lot of questions, especially the timing of the announcement where Russia has conferred upon Prime Minister Modi the state's highest award. So is India pursuing an independent policy irrespective of what wrath it might incur from the US, and at what cost, especially at this time? Is it realistic to expect that it can actually face sanctions from the US? Of course, keeping in mind the historical relationship that US and India has had. Or will it be one of those lucky few NATO allies who are exempted from these kind of sanctions? And I'm talking about Slovakia, Greece and Bulgaria. Also, does it face this, or on the other hand, does it face the same fate as Turkey, who is under increasing pressure as US kicks it off its jet program after the Turkish leader went ahead with the purchase of S-400s from Russia? So let's talk about this and more with our guests. I'd like to welcome from Islam. Joining us at the moment is Air Marshal Shehzad Chauhdary. He's a political and defense analyst. And also we have Mr. Ashok Swain, an analyst joining us from Sweden. Once again, welcome to both of you. I would like to start with you, Air Marshal Shehzad Chauhdary. We are, of course, seeing the timing not only in terms of what BJP is heading towards the polls, the elections are underway in India, but also in terms of the tensions that we have seen between Pakistan and India. What do you make of this? Where do you think India is headed with, will it possibly face sanctions from the US or not?
Well, actually, the US has already authorized or exempted India from this particular sanction regime for all nations which do business with Russia or Iran for that matter. So they have exemptions from the US on Russia as well as Iran. Now that's a very special treatment that the US has offered to India. What it's got yet to be seen is how does it impact the US's own plans to proffer or offer its own military equipment to India, because they're very keen to sell India their armaments and their weapons and their fighters. And we know that from Turkey's example that with the US had major issues. In fact, they have sanctioned Turkey and will not offer them the F-35 because they have bought the S-400 already. So the combination of the S-400 and the US weaponry is something that the US doesn't take very kindly to. Now, how does that play out in India is yet to be seen. I think at the moment, as you've seen, both Russia and the US are trying to cost India, and especially Narendra Modi, considering that he's likely to perhaps retain his position as the prime minister after the elections. And if that happens, then of course it is also a country in need, and it is declared very openly that it needs more weapons and more armament from nations. So obviously Russia and the US will pitch their offers to India and Narendra Modi. And in that sense, you see the preparation being played out politically and diplomatically.
Right. And earlier, Mr. Ashok, India, when tried to pursue a way from CATSA, it completely got a cold shoulder from the US. However, it's pleaded its case that it's surrounded by hostile enemies or hostile nations. However, Turkey has said the same thing, but it's continued to face the threat of sanctions. How do you see this alternative sort of parallel dialogue taking place between US and Turkey and US and India?
I think US and India both realize that they can play one against another. And I think Modi is acting in that way, and as well the American diplomats. This is somehow going on. Both need each other at this time because particularly with the context of the regional issues. But the question is whether the US will exempt India permanently or long term, that's a matter no one knows, because it's all, as I continue to say, is the U.S. is playing the game in a not exactly the way somebody could really assume it or expect or we can guess clearly. But I think overall it shows because the market-wise, India has been traditionally getting the arms from Russians, and gradually they're moving to Americans, and Americans are interested to get as much as they can, because it was nothing. So now they're getting quite a lot. And of course, Indian arms, there is a huge demand inside India to buy more arms. Though, of course, India has come down in has become number 2 for the last 2 years in the buying arms in the world. Saudi Arabia is number 1 now. But I think there is a huge pressure. There is a huge lobby within India, just actually wants to buy as much arms as possible.
For US, it's also important to have India against China, right? And at the same time, this is, like Mr. Ashok said, a huge monetary value to the potential arms sales that India could have with the US.
I agree with you. I think, but it's for India to decide how they want to proceed with this. Because look, I mean, they have about 70% Russian-sourced armament of the weaponry in the 3 armed forces. 70% is a huge inventory to be replaced at the stroke of a pen, or maybe in a couple of years, or even 5 years. It'll take a lot of money for India to buy Western equipment, whether that is from France or from the US, to replace the entire Russian things. Now, having said that, which really means that if it's impossible, and it's impossible for within the next decade even for India to give up on everything Russian, how will the US then sort of coexist with the Russian equipment? Because I know per se, and by my own experience, that the Americans are very sensitive to multiple weapon systems, from multiply sourced weapon systems, to coexist, and how they can interact, and therefore so much of leakage can take place from one to the other in terms of technology, in terms of the sensitivity to technology. And a lot of today's weaponry is based around softwares and the whatever is fed in terms of the software and the codes, etc., etc. So keeping that in mind, I think India, in my judgment, and it's up to Indians to decide what they want to do, but in my judgment, the Indians will have to chart a very clear course. They cannot really relish the particular situation where both Russia and the Americans are running after them, and they have a lot of money to offer to both sides, but with a very clear line of action and a blueprint in terms of how is it that they are going to chart out a way when they have multiple sourced weaponry. Pakistan started this much earlier in the 1960s, and we've had a separate stream of the Chinese as well as the Western equipment, and we've never mixed those two. But then it has its own complications, which are operational in nature, which are strategic in nature, and therefore a nation will have to meet up with those kind of challenges. So how India plays out is really up to them. But yes, it's going to be a difficult thing for them.
So, Mr. Ashok, you heard Air Marshal's comment on this. It's a very key point here. What India decides to do and how it deals with the US, or how the US deals with India, will determine their relationship in the near future, especially considering that PM Modi is quite confident of a return. But if we were to take a look at it from the post-Pulwama attack and how tensions between Pakistan and India have escalated, how do you see the importance of this deal forming out or panning out with Russia?
I think there are a few things. Just to clarify it, there is a certain lobby within India which wants to buy weapons from Russians, because it helps somehow, because there is a lot of money involved, which is easier to get it from Russia than if you buy it from the Western countries. It's a possibility of this leading to scams, which we see now in the Rafale and other cases, and even the Bofors, the Sweden's cases. So I think there is a certain lobby besides operational, which in nature, but also the diplomatic in nature. But there's more important also the corruption has a part of it, how you deal with it. The second thing is, of course, in a scenario like this for the last few years, particularly after Modi came to power, with the signing of LEMOA, India has been quite close to Americans, whereas its long-standing relationship with the Russians have been quite in a difficult situation, and it has come into confrontation with China quite a number of times. So while the Chinese-Russian coming together, Indians had gone to the American side. So it's a time when they realized that they cannot really put all their eggs in the American basket, because Americans, particularly in the Trump administration, they can't really trust how much they can get the support from there. So I think it's a balancing act India is playing now to try to make certain kind of overtures. Particularly, Modi doesn't have much in its kitty to play with to this kind of foreign policy maneuver. It's the only thing which is trying to do with it is buying arms. So if you look at it, all he is doing in the France or in Russia or in the United States, wherever he goes, is just the majority of portion of buying that relationship is through buying arms. So I think this is what's happening in the Russian case as well.
So here I'm being welcomed Major General Ijaz Awan, an analyst joining us from Lahore. Welcome to Newswire. The discussion on the table really is how India is going to move forward with this deal of the S-400s with Russia. And how, in your view, does this affect the US's take on how it will handle India's decision, especially considering it has sanctioned other countries who have dealt in arms purchases with Russia?
Well, unfortunately, American behavior has been very preferential towards India. If you look at the history, and as you are talking now, if China buys S-400 anti-missile system, they are threatened of sanctions. If Turkey buys it, they are likely to come under sanctions, and their supply of F-35 aircraft is stopped. But if India does that, they would take it in the normal stride. And they have done the same in previously always. When in 1974, India exploded a nuclear device, America looked the other way, and India did not come under sanctions. And again in 1984, when they did the nuclear blast, again they did not come under sanctions. And when Pakistan did the same in 1998, that was the time when they came under sanctions immediately. So this has been their behavior. In 1971, they trained Mukti Bahanis, invaded Pakistan, entered into a mutual support agreement with Russia, and dismembered Pakistan, whereas the American fleet never reached for our help. So America at that time looked away. In 1965 war, when we were operating F-104 Starfighters and Sabre aircraft, so immediately after, in 1965 war, Pakistan came under sanctions, and they stopped the supplies of spares to Pakistan, accusing Pakistan of using equipment against India, which was purchased and which was meant to be used against the communist USSR. So this has been American behavior. In my personal view, nothing will happen. They would take this bitter pill. India would fleece both America and Russia at the same time. So they would like to purchase S-400 without sanction, and they will get away with it. Even if they make a deal of nuclear submarine, they'll get away with it, and America would look the other way. Because India has been their favored and much sought after.
Major General, in your opinion, Major General, but Pakistan continues to be in a position as a result, don't you think, while US and Russia continue to arm India? What is the threat perception for Pakistan in your view if this is the circumstances and they continue this way historically?
Well, definitely it is going to worry Pakistan, and Pakistan will have to think of a response against these developments. Should they buy a nuclear submarine or S-400 anti-missile system, Pakistan will have to look for a counter, though it has been our stated policy that we do not wish to get into a into arms race of any kind, and we are not, our defense budget is not as big as that of India, because India is planning to buy arms worth $14 billion. Pakistan is not going to do that. But it definitely would make us think, and we need to think of a response against such developments.
Right. Mr. Ashok, also let me ask you this, that at the timing of this very announcement that comes in, and I'm referring to the award that Russians have given to Prime Minister Modi, April 12th, it was announced. What do you make of that? Is there some more to it than we have seen, or is it deliberate that it was announced on April 12th?
It's very difficult to say what exactly Russians want, but Russians probably, they just, it's a ruse or whatever the game they are playing. But I think that, but I can see it from the Indian side. It has been in a kind of plan from Modi's side, because Modi is getting increasing pressure from the Indian side that, look, the minorities are not happy. So if you look at it, the prices which he is trying to manipulatively to get it from the different countries, or he got one Seoul from the Peace Prize from Seoul in South Korea. Then recently he has got Jayed Medal from United Arab Emirates, and now from the Russians this order. And I think he is trying to show that what you are saying in India doesn't matter, but the countries like Islamic countries like United Arab Emirates gives me the highest prize. And the Russians, particularly, it's connected with the jars, is an order which is how the Christian countries are also giving me the prize. So I think he is trying to use whatever the diplomatic means he has, which is very surprising, because there is also a similar prize which was Japan was trying to give to Manmohan Singh just before the election, but Manmohan Singh tried to convey to them, look, at this time of the elections, it will not be the proper to accept me. So they waited after the election when he gone out of the power to give that kind of prize. But that kind of decency, political decency, Modi doesn't have. So but Modi is.
Does it concern you that
for the elections?
Does it concern you that the voters in turn will be affected by this kind of an award and a series of awards that Modi is receiving?
That's something which is just to manipulate the media. That doesn't affect the people. That's no way can affect the people. I mean, people are much more interested in their basic issues of economy, job, the farming crisis. Nobody talks about even Balakot. Forget about this stuff, a medal, which he gets it from Russia or from United Arab Emirates. How does it matter who know this? It's just for the media to manipulate it, or the media has, to try to find a story which would divert from the real issues to project that the Modi is such a leader of an international repute.
Right. And Air Marshal, let's ask you about your take on this timing of the Russian award. And Mr. Ashok has said in terms of just feeding the mass hysteria that we see in the social media and the media in general in India.
I agree with him. I think he's made a very apt analysis of this, because I think Mr. Modi is desperate. If anything, it tells you how desperate Mr. Modi is in terms of his political vulnerabilities in this election. He's not as clear or as sure of winning the election as he was perhaps in 2014. Mm-hmm. There is no Modi wave in India as being reported from the current or the initial reviews that are coming out of the election process. So if that be the case, obviously he'll hold on to anything that is held out to him or that is handed to him. And it's quite possible that he may have asked for an award to be given by the Russians so that he can show it as some sort of a feather in his cap. But having said that, let me quickly go on to the previous point of the S-400. S-400, when introduced in our region and in India, will be a highly destabilizing agent in terms of our deterrence equation or the strategic stability that we have enjoyed, or this region has enjoyed. India and Pakistan, two nuclear nations, have enjoyed. Because this particular weapon system will enable India to not only engage targets at different altitudes, but even outside the atmosphere. Now, that is where Pakistan's nuclear capacity or capability begins to get affected. The ballistic missile defense has been a question that has been discussed very frequently in our strategic balance discussions with the Indians. And we've always maintained, Pakistan has always maintained and stated that any such addition which will actually give India this capability of a ballistic missile defense will mean that the deterrence equation has been disturbed. How does Pakistan respond to it? Obviously, there are various things that Pakistan has done or can do or will do to try and minimize the capacity or the ability of such a weapon system to interdict Pakistan's nuclear potential. That will happen in due course of time. But what that actually launches this entire region into is some sort of a nuclear weapons race, which is not good for the region at all. So it may, might be a reason for Russia to still pine for the S-400, but let me suggest that let me suggest that they're going to be response from Pakistan of a different nature, of a different form.
So there is a strategic implication of India and Russia going ahead with this. And Mr. Ashok, what do you think about this? The strategic implication is huge. Of course, there's already a threat of both countries having the same kind of nuclear armed race going on. But with this purchase, Pakistan will obviously have to respond. So it kind of spurs on this vicious cycle, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is what's going on for ages, isn't it? Something not. I think that the main priority is to sell as many weapons as possible. Second priority is to, if it doesn't go out of control. So the nuclear thing comes when it comes to that stage. The first thing is they want to sell as many weapons as possible. And I think we need to realize that this is a part of the process which has been going on. And India, Pakistan have been subjected to this part of the process for a long period of time. This is something which is actual. But I think I will take it back to this, how the Indians perceive. Because for some time, Indians had got into this mindset that they have grown out of Pakistan. And now they look at China as the real threat. But I think now what has happened in the last few months or a year or so, the Indians are back to Pakistan again. They have forgotten China, particularly after Doklam. So I think Doklam and the present Balakot, which shows that the Indian aspiration of being a match to China, and Indians have grown out of the Pakistan's comparison, and I think that has again back to the square one. So this is an unfortunate situation which both the countries have brought back into it.
Right, and it's something that has been going on and on. Of course, there's also the debate about India holding military equipment that is being deemed by various independent reports as mostly being vintage. But I don't want to get into that. We're running out of time. General Ijaz Awan, I want to pull you into this last comment and try and ask you how you see the sort of parallel argument going on here. While US threatens Turkey with sanctions on S-400's purchase, on the other hand, India continues to get exemptions as it does in other NATO allies. And how do you see this? Do you think it's something to do with Turkey being a Muslim secular country, or this is a completely different debate?
As I said earlier, India is always getting a preferential treatment. It is not that Turkey is being sanctioned as a Muslim country. They are viewing it as a threat to Israel and their relation with Israel and Turkey. So from that point of view, they are bringing Turkey under sanction, whereas in case of India, they have always been going soft pedaling against India for the reason, as I said earlier, when they violated the civil nuclear arms deal in 1974 with Canada and America and started enriching uranium and plutonium. So at that time, it did not come under sanction. And now, likewise, they'll get away with this deal because they are the preferred allies in the region, and America would look the other way. As you were asking about Pakistan's response, if it is not a non-diplomatic word, I may say that there is always a peeing solution to the Barlev line. Let them have these missiles. We will always have a solution to counter this threat. But yes, it does affect the security paradigm within the subcontinent and particularly between India and Pakistan.
All right. Thank you so much, Major, for your contribution. Also, Mr. Ashok and Air Marshal Shehzad Chauhdary for participating here on Newswire. We've come to the end of this segment. I'll take a quick short break and we'll be back with more news. Welcome back. Moving on to Iran. Floods in Iran have killed 76 people and caused more than $2.2 billion in damages in recent weeks. And flood warnings for the large areas of the country are still coming in. Officials are telling us that 725 bridges have been destroyed in Iran and over 14,000 kilometers of road networks are damaged. And of course, there is the fear that the death toll will continue to rise. And to make matters worse, US-imposed sanctions have impeded donations from coming in easily and helping the already cash and equipment stressed Iranian Red Crescent Society. But at this critical juncture, neighboring countries UAE and Saudi Arabia have come in with a promise of aid, and they have offered to help these flood victims in Iran and provide some kind of a plan, some kind of a program which will help those affected. Now, UAE and Saudi Red Crescent societies have said they are drawing up these plans for flood relief within the framework of the Islamic Brotherhood and in solidarity with the Iranian nation. Of course, this comes in the backdrop of what has historically been the relationship of Iran and Saudi Arabia and UAE, and to explore more whether this opens a new chapter in relationships between these Muslim countries, and also trying to highlight how the situation in Iran and the flood victims and the government, how they're handling it and how bad is it now. We have with us our guests. Let me welcome those joining us on Newswire today. First of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. Mohammad Marandi. He's a political analyst and he's joining us from Tehran. Thank you so much for joining us on Newswire, Mr. Marandi. And also we have Ms. Atefeh Toghyani, the researcher, and she's also from Tehran. Welcome to the show. I want to come to you, Mr. Marandi, first of all, and help our viewers around the world, help us understand what the situation looks like right now, as more than 20 provinces out of 31 are inundated with these floods.
Well, the floods have been pretty severe in 4 provinces. Not the whole of the provinces have been affected, but large areas of these 4 provinces. And the devastation has been pretty significant for some small cities and a large number of villages. The amount of rain that Iran's had this year is unprecedented in the last 50 years.
Right.
And over the last few weeks, we've had a tremendous amount of rain. And since over the last few months we've had a lot of rain, almost all the dams in the country are full. Mm-hmm. So since they're at full capacity, it's very difficult for the government to control the water levels for such a large amount of flooding waters. But the situation is now normalizing. In most areas, the floods have gone down, but now we're moving towards the phase where they have to rebuild the damaged towns and villages, roads and bridges.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Atefeh, earlier on when the foreign minister of Iran came out and said that this is not just economic terrorism, this is humanitarian terrorism, when things like helicopters weren't even being allowed to come through to help in these relief efforts, Secretary of State Pompeo came out and said, no, this is absolutely, there is no weightage in this claim, and it is actually mismanagement.
Okay. Yes, in fact, with expansion of the news of the flood in Iran, some of the countries like Germany, Turkey, and Kuwait start to help the country by relief packages. But in fact, the helps were so limited and were so late, unfortunately. At first, this limitation goes back to some issues, some factors that one of them is the weak media coverage. And also the other one is, in fact, because of the sanctions that turn it to be a humanitarian problem. Mm-hmm. And we have some countries like Zimbabwe that a few weeks ago it had the same flood, and many countries helped the country. Approximately in one donation, Zimbabwe got $400,000 from Red Cross of the United States. But Iran couldn't just transfer any money because of the sanctions. And also, besides all this, yes.
Okay, let me welcome also Sarwar Naqvi, former ambassador, who's joining us from Islamabad. Welcome to the show. Mr. Ali, how do you see this? Iran has gone through and is going through a massive crisis in terms of this challenge that the floods are posing. But the sanctions having come in have impeded progress. But now that UAE and Saudi Arabia have come up and offered help, how do you see this and what hope do you have in terms of their future relationship?
Well, you see, first about the sanctions, the problem is that sanctions cannot be lifted for one specific development. And the Iranian floods, which are a natural disaster, really are problem that causes, the whole issue to be placed in a humanitarian framework where help is needed, but help cannot be provided. Now, this is a dilemma that many a times occurs in the interstate affairs. In regard to the UAE and Saudi assistance that has been offered to Iran, I think that augurs well for better understanding and relationship between the Arab countries and Iran, which has been under strain in recent years.
Do you think it's an unprecedented move, especially considering that just recently, just days before, Saudi Arabia went out of its way to welcome US's ban on IRGC?
Yes, I think it is quite unprecedented, and you are right. I mean, this dramatizes or sort of puts in sharp relief two different kind of actions. The ban on the IRGC that was welcomed by the Saudi government, and the offer of assistance to
What in your view is the reason? What do you think was the main idea behind this?
Well, I think the element of concern that is for the people of Iran is manifest in the Saudi offer of assistance. And that, I think, is a positive development, though, I mean, it is not a step to better relations with the government of Iran, but it is a humanitarian gesture which will have a positive impact on the bilateral relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And to that extent, I think it augurs well for the future.
Ms. Atefeh, how do you see this move by UAE and Saudi Arabia on an aid package for Iranians, considering their historical relationship? Is this an opportunity waiting to be seized by all three countries in terms of better relations?
In fact, Iranians are, prediction what will happen is so hard now, because we have to see a real proof, a real action, and a real proof to know that what comes next. In fact, yes, but it will help the nations to put aside their hostility.
Their hostility, and also brings into context something that has happened while, Mr. Marandi, I want to bring you into this debate and to kind of expand a little more on the US sanctions. While those were something imposed in, like I said, support of Saudi Arabia, but let's not forget here that despite those sanctions, despite the possibility of Saudi Arabia setting a precedent, if we were to favor, the optimistic side of this conversation, there still really brings into question the humanitarian side of the floods. I mean, this is a crucial humanitarian crisis unfolding, and yet the conversation remains that why has there not been any kind of loophole to allow for donations to come in, for progress to happen in terms of relief from the sanctions?
Well, I think that's the objective. The Americans don't want any loopholes. The intention is to make Iranians suffer as much as possible. Of course, it's not a crisis across the country. It's a crisis in those areas that have been deeply flooded. But the objective of the United States is to make Iranians suffer. I mean, if you look at Venezuela, for example, the Americans have been trying their best over the past few months to make people suffer. And in fact, when the Americans helped wreck the electrical power plant that provides electricity in the country through sabotage just a few weeks ago, we saw a key senator, American senator for Florida, tweet that no water, no electricity, and hopefully no Maduro. He was gloating over the fact that people had no electricity. So the Americans take pleasure.
This brings me to my next point, Mr. Marandi, that while the U.S. continues to take this over-aggressive stance, President Trump continues to exercise excessive pressure on Iran. What we've seen is relief efforts being provided by the Vatican. The Pope has donated about 100,000 euros. We've seen Germany help, Japan, Kuwait, Oman, Pakistan, Russia, Switzerland, Turkey. I mean, like all these countries in one way or the other have provided relief despite these US sanctions. I mean, clearly there has to be some global shift, especially in the Middle East, towards US's policies towards Iran.
No, you're absolutely correct. And you should also add Pakistan, which has sent relief to Iran, and Iraq. Iraq provided not only a large amount of logistical support, but they've actually brought in large numbers of people to help with the flood. So there has been a lot of support from neighboring countries, regional countries, the Chinese and the Russians as well. The Europeans, not so much. And as I said, the United States, of course, they've been blocking any financial transfers by the Red Cross. So yes, there is a lot of sympathy, and I think that, and the fact that, for example, your own country, Pakistan, has helped with
relief efforts.
Flood.
Also, I'd like to mention here the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, in reports coming in, will be visiting also on the 21st. I mean, this is, of course, I would like to highlight here, Ms. Atefeh, and I want to hear your comments on it. But in fact, also you, Mr. Ali, I will come to you, Mr. Ali, first. Is there a global shift in relationships with Iran of other countries, is irrespective of how excessive US has tried to make its policy towards Iran?
Well, a lot has been discussed, and I have my comments about some of the things that have been mentioned by my other colleagues, panelists. You see, I had said that sanctions, I said in the very beginning that sanctions are a problem when there is a humanitarian angle to some situation. And in this case, sanctions cannot be lifted, but there are humanitarian considerations which lead to assistance being offered. The United States, of course, is very callous, and I would agree with Mr. Marandi about its policies in Yemen or in Venezuela, etc. But here, in the case of Iran, we should focus the discussion on Iran and the Middle East. And here, I think that the governments that have offered assistance are in sympathy with the people of Iran. And even if they have differences with the government of Iran, they are sympathizing with the people of Iran, and they are offering assistance. So it should be
something the US is not even capable of doing. Let me point out.
Yeah, well, you know, the overall perspective of all the developments cannot be taken in one discussion. So there are many points about this, and Iran is, I am very, you know, I am quite friendly. I am a believer in friendship with Iran, but Iran is not entirely right, nor are those countries entirely right. So,
well, it's a tricky question. I agree with you, Mr. Ali. I see your perspective where you're coming from. Thank you so much, Ms. Atefeh and Mr. Marandi, and also Mr. Ali, for taking your time out and speaking to us here on Newswire. We've come to the end of our show, and we will be back tomorrow with more news and updates. Goodbye.